grieving. Some families will be lost to one another forever. To those of you who face the difficulties of reconnecting with family and establishing ongoing relationships, we say sorry. We offer this apology in the hope that it will assist your healing and in order to shine a light on a dark period of our nation's history. To those who have fought for the truth to be heard, we hear you now.
You're listening to Adopt Perspective, a podcast for anyone affected by adoption. I'm one of your hosts, Jo Sparrow. This podcast is a production of Jigsaw Queensland Post-Adoption Support Service. However, the views expressed are those of the people participating, not necessarily Jigsaw Queensland. The podcast discusses adult themes and listener discretion is advised. Hi, it's Jo Sparrow here. Just a word before we begin. This episode talks about the trauma that has been caused by the removal of Aboriginal children from their families. We recognise that this could be distressing to some listeners. However, we believe that these conversations need to be had to increase the understanding of the hurt and ongoing harm caused by these policies. To those that were affected, we're sorry. A little bit of important background for this episode. The Stolen Generations refers to a period in Australia's history where Aboriginal children were removed from their families through government policies. This happened from the mid-1800s to the 1970s. In the 1860s, Victoria became the first state to pass laws authorising Aboriginal children to be removed from their parents. Similar policies were later adopted by other states and territories, and finally by the federal government in the 1900s. For about a century, thousands of Aboriginal children were systematically taken from their families, communities, and culture. Many never found their way back. These children are known as the Stolen Generation survivors or stolen children. These children were taken by police from their homes on their way to school. They were placed in more than 480 institutions, adopted or fostered by non-Indigenous people, and were often subjected to abuse. The children were denied all access to their culture. They were not allowed to speak their language, and they were punished if they did. The impacts of this are still being felt today. Currently, it is estimated there are more than 1,700 Stolen Generation survivors all over Australia. Which brings us to today's guest, a family genealogist who stumbled across his adoption via a DNA test at the age of 59. The father of 5, grandfather of many, and foster carer, is also a committed advocate for adopted people through his work as president of Adoptee Rights Australia. Welcome to Adopt Perspective, Peter Capomolla Moore. I hope I said that right. It's wonderful to have you join us.
Thank you.
Capomolla, isn't it? Sorry.
Capomolla.
Wow, I really made a mess of it.
It took me a while to get my tongue around it as well.
Yeah, I was practicing this morning and everything.
Thank you so much for inviting us on this morning. I'm really chuffed to be here.
Oh, we're chuffed to have you. Peter, you're what our community refers to as a late discovery adoptee. And I just wondered if we might begin with your adoption story and if you could tell us about your childhood, family, and eventually how you much later, came to discover that you're adopted.
I grew up in Western Sydney, around Granville, and typical family. Not very wealthy. Financial battlers. They didn't have a car when I was adopted. My first journey was on the train. In fact, they didn't even have a cot or anything for me. I spent my first weeks, I guess, in the drawer of a chest of drawers. They made a bed in there for us. So it wasn't the typical narrative of adopted to a wealthy couple. That wasn't the case.
No, I wasn't either.
And 4 years later, they had a biological child, a younger sibling, a daughter. So I grew up, there's just the two of us, and I was the big brother, and When I was about 14, we moved from there to a 5-acre hobby farm. So that was a bit of a change in life, and I ended up as apprentice motor mechanic for a Ford dealership. I loved mechanics, but I didn't love the culture in that dealership, and I didn't really fit. And to be honest, I spent the last couple of years of that apprenticeship, I drank my way through that. So yeah, it was a pretty torrid time.
Yeah.
But yeah, so yeah, from there I became a exploration driller, for gas and coal and sometimes water, and I met my wife about that time, and then I got an opportunity to head to the Hunter Valley as an underground coal miner, and we moved up there, found ourselves in a very large farmhouse with 22 external doors, and
wow,
two of us. I had an old ambulance, and we moved our possessions. I think we had a lounge, a fridge, and a TV. I think that was it. We had a box for a coffee table. But yeah, and from there we end up with 5 children, and life's always changes, and so anyway, fast forward to about 2002, I think. I got interested in genealogy, basically to help my mother-in-law, who had been fostered out as a child, a 2-year-old, when her mother died.
Mm-hmm.
And so she didn't understand, she didn't know where her family came from and wasn't sure about surnames and stuff. And within a week, I found a family for her, and found a cousin, and I thought, okay, I'm pretty good at this. I should look at mine. So I started researching my own family history, and end up with 13,500 people in my family tree.
Wow.
And I went to a number of family tree reunions interstate in Queensland, around St George, and Kilcare, is it?
Kilcoy.
Kilcoy.
Oh, Kilcoy, yeah.
Kilcoy, yeah. Up there, and with the adoptive parents, and they paraded me as their son, and related to all these people. Of course, as it turns out, I wasn't. And I, in fact, had a headstone remade for the Irish convict ancestor, and put on his grave that we refurbished, and helped to organise a reunion on Australia Day 2008. Again, not my ancestor.
Yeah.
So, in 2016, I was interested in my 2 oldest grandchildren have dark olive skin, and I was interested where that came from. And I thought it all came from their father. And we were watching TV one night, and they had an add-on for ancestry kits on special, and my wife said, go on, buy 3 of them, one for me, one for you, and one for our granddaughter, which we did. And so I got the results back in about September 2016. I did not understand DNA one iota.
No, it's difficult.
Yeah. For those who don't know, that when you get a ancestry DNA back, and the screen on the left-hand side of the screen is a pie chart with the description of your ethnicity. Back in 2016, they had a heading above that pie chart which said from thousands of years ago. So when I saw 46% Italian, I just thought thousands of years ago. Yeah, mm-hmm. Gaelics invaded Rome. Yeah, might come from there somewhere. They don't have that heading any longer because it's obviously misleading. Mm. That a percentage that high is very close.
Yes,
very new. And anyway, on the other side, you have a link to the DNA matches you have with other people who've done their DNA.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't even understand that. And I didn't understand that went from the closest to the most distant. I had no concept of that. I just knew there's my granddaughter and there's another match there, near my granddaughter. And very soon, the woman who that match was messaged me, and she said, I grew up in an Italian family. I don't look like my brothers and sisters. After my father died when I was 11-year-old in 1982, they teased me that I was adopted. So I immediately felt empathetic for this woman, and I was determined that I would help her find where she belonged in my family. So we exchanged messages and emails, and she told me about her family. I told her about mine. And I got to the point I went, okay, it could be this cousin or that uncle, but which side of the family is it? So I decided, without telling her, without telling anyone else, I gave 2 ancestry kits to my adopted parents for Christmas 2016. Now, they took a while before they did those tests, surprisingly. And they basically did them in February of 2017. So I knew they took about 6 weeks to come back. So about the 5-week mark in March, I decided to, look at the DNA, look at the tree. And then something stuck out. I realized that there was no names in my DNA matches or surnames that I recognized. I thought, that can't be right. So I looked at my wife's DNA, and sure enough, there was surnames that I was familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
So the wheels are starting to turn, and I always knew I was born at Salvation Army Bethesda Hospital at Marrickville in Sydney. And I'd Googled that many years before, and all I got was an image of an old building. In desperation, I Googled again, and all this stuff came up about forced adoption. Apologies. I'm going, hang on. This is more than a smoking gun. This is pretty obvious. So my first thought was, okay. I went in to the bedroom. My wife was in bed reading a book, and I sat on the end of the bed and I said, I'm adopted. And she said, get out of here. No, you're not. I went, yeah, you look at this. And I showed her, and she was convinced as well. And and then I thought about this forced adoption. I went, how come I don't know about this? I watch the news all the time. I'm an avid news watcher, but I can't remember ever seeing this before. So that was the start of a roller coaster of emotions. Mm-hmm. And when I spoke to to this woman who, by now, I realised she was in fact my sister, and she went into panic. She went, something wrong with my DNA. I've made this poor guy think he's adopted. And she went off and got another ancestry DNA test done and sent it through England to make sure it went to a different lab. And of course, it came back the same. So on my ancestry DNA matches, there's 2 for her.
Wow.
Then she said, well, what's going on? Why don't I look like my brother and sister? What's happening in my life? Is my father really my father? And, I promised her that I would find the truth. And I realized that the only way to do that was to find my mother. And so I sent away for the adoption information, and while I was waiting for that to happen, I started to learn about DNA, and I looked for someone with some trees, and anyone familiar with ancestry DNA will realise that most people do it to find out whether they're a Viking or not. They aren't genealogists. They don't have trees that are publicly searchable. So only a small percentage have those. And I found some very distant cousins, 7 or 8 distance, which is quite a long way away. And I was looking for a common ancestor in their trees. I figured that common ancestor would most likely be my common ancestor. And I found some, and I settled on a name, and I built a tree basically off their tree. I copied one of their trees and I put myself in as that core person as the ancestor. And I built the tree down like an umbrella rather than up like you usually build a tree from yourself backwards. Well, I built the tree from backwards forward. And as I did that, I found more and more surnames through marriages, which were also in my DNA. So I was convinced I had the right tree, and that my mother, when I found her, would fit in there somewhere. So long story short, I got quite frustrated very early after a month that I hadn't heard any results back. And I rang the organisation that I was contracted to do that, I guess. And they told me it was going to take 7 or 8 months. And I said, no, I'm not waiting that long. And I spoke to docs at the time directly, and I had no problem with docs because I'd done foster caring, so it didn't faze me at all to pick up the phone to them. And found a very nice lady who said, if you can get a medical certificate that says that you're not able to function, which I wasn't, we might be able to speed things up a little bit.
Yeah.
And they told me I was going to get a package of information. So when that package arrived a week later, that was quite a big package. I looked at it in the morning before work and I went, oh, where do I start? I'll look at it at lunchtime. At lunchtime, I had a look at it. I went, where do I start? I'll just quickly eat my lunch. I'll finish the job I'm doing, and then I'll come back to the car park and I'll give myself plenty of time to have a look. Again, when I was looking at it after work in the car park, I was a bit daunted by how much information there was, and I saw a plastic sleeve. And when I pulled the sleeve out, the adoption certificate was in it. And I immediately told my adopted sister, who did not believe ancestry DNA at the time, and said, because she's a world-renowned professor of medicine, she said, I have friends who are professors of genetics, and I'm sure they can do a DNA test between us. So I had to call her first and say, hold everything. I have the adoption certificate. It's here, and their names are on it. And so she immediately said, well, we need to do one more thing. We need to, I said, what's that? She said, we need to tell mum and dad that you know. And she said, do you want to do it or you want me to do it? I went, you can do it. Which I think was the correct answer. Yeah. And so they went and saw them on the day before Mother's Day, 2017, told them that I knew. And they had arranged her and her husband to take them out for lunch on Mother's Day. And I was to arrive just prior to them, and I was running a little bit late as usual, so I was just prior to them getting there. And I arrived, so prepared to walk on eggshells and with a bunch of flowers, and I was greeted at the door from the adoptive father, said, you saved our marriage. And then he proceeded to say, we burnt the papers when you were a teen because you're always ours. And okay. And then I started to explain to him how I found out and what I'd gone through. And I had, that afternoon when I got that adoption certificate, as soon as I got home, I Googled my mother's name and the ancestral name that I'd settled on, and I immediately found my oldest brother within a minute.
Wow. Okay. Look, before we go any further, I'm going to, if you don't mind, I just want to mine into a couple of things that we've already talked about. It must have been an incredible shock for you at the time. And then when you went and spoke to your adoptive parents about it, I guess what you got back was their perspective.
Yep.
How did you go about processing this information and what you were feeling at the time?
Okay, well, I guess I was, well, what just happened? How did this happen? And the adoptive parents' DNA results came in about a week later. And they had arranged they were going to call in to see us. As it happens, when the DNA came in, well, when the mother's DNA came in, the adopted mother's DNA came in. So we're expecting that, it was all going to come out, and it could be traumatic and might have a heart attack, or who knows. And I showed her DNA, showed her where she came from, and all this stuff, and ethnicity, and people who were related to it by DNA. And there was nothing, not a hint of anything. The conversation never all faltered. So that left me confused. And then 2 days later, the adopted father's DNA came in. And so I made a trip, and I thought, I've had 2 days to think about this. So I'm watching for anything. Again, nothing, complete poker faced. So this had me confused. I'm going, how would they not know? So then I'd read about rapid adoption. So this is going through my head. Was it a rapid adoption? I knew that the adopted mother had had numerous miscarriages, and she was a bit neurotic, I guess. And I thought, I can imagine her there and freaking out, and they go, no, here's your baby here, it's fine. And these are things going, because I just couldn't process it. How would they not know? But they did. And I told them they should have been poker players, because they had complete poker faces on. They just
buried was that secret. So buried that it couldn't come up. Yeah.
It's so buried, and it still is. And my daughter took the granddaughter there one day, and the adopted mother went to the granddaughter, I don't know why so tall. We're not tall. My daughter's sitting there thinking, what? You're not related, but she didn't say it. But yeah, it's what they do. They've told themselves this lie for so long that they'll believe it in the face of the knowledge that they know it's not true.
I think that can become part of the narrative too, even if there's not been a secret. I always knew, and yet even now my mother will, adoptive mother will say something, about the kids doing something like their grandfather, or something like that, and I'm like, yeah, but they're not blood related. So, and it's almost, and she goes, oh yes, right. And so I don't know whether they've just absorbed that I'm theirs so much that for us it sticks out like a sore thumb, but for them maybe not. I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I don't know either. It's a strange area. It's a strange phenomenon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just before you move on to finding your mother, I just wonder, how did that news, when it did come out, how has it impacted your relationships?
I especially after that meeting on Mother's Day, and what I was leading into was that I told him that I was going to meet my mother, and straight away the adopted mother wanted to come with me. When my mother and most of my siblings lived in the Gold Coast, and I didn't want her to go, but I didn't know how to say it. And my sister stepped forward and went, no, it's Peter's journey. He needs to do this alone.
Yeah.
and which she was absolutely right, I did.
Mm-hmm.
And to which my adopted mother said, but you said she had a stroke. What if she dies and I don't get to meet her? And that really crushed me, because I went, hang on a minute, my father died, I didn't get to meet him. You're going to take this to your grave. You didn't care that I didn't get to meet my mother, but now you're worried that you might meet her.
Yeah.
And I look, I couldn't get out of there quick enough. Because the realization was this was not about me.
Yeah.
And so that damaged the relationship. I feel and still feel disconnected to them, and I don't think anything will make that right. It's going to the family home became traumatic, because all those figurines and different things around the place that I'd grown up with that would have once been mementos are now just reminders of that lie.
Yeah.
It definitely affected the relationship. There's no doubt about it. I still saw him. My adopted father's now deceased, and my adopted mother's in a nursing home. It was never the same.
Yeah. I'm sorry that I interrupted you before, but please do move on with your search for your mother.
Okay. Well, yeah. Well, I found my brother, and on a blog, and in that he revealed our mother's name and my grandmother's name and my great-grandfather's name. So I went to my tree that I built in Ancestry and looked for my great-grandfather's name, and I found him. I wasn't sure it was him, but I added my grandmother's name and my mother's name under his, and I immediately got hints, which you do in Ancestry. They give you little buds come on their names and tells you that there is more information, and other people who may also have those names in their trees. And so I checked those hints, and sure enough, here's my brother had an Ancestry account. He had a huge tree. He was a genealogist in his own right. And because in his tree, I saw that was 2 brothers under a first marriage and a brother and 2 sisters under a second marriage. And when I looked closely, I realized there was a fatherless child in between. So I immediately knew that was me, that he knew that I existed. And so I sent him a message and said my name, looking for more information about the fatherless child in his tree, and my phone number. What I didn't know is that my mother had divulged just 3 weeks before of my existence to her husband of 55 years and my oldest brother. And he had promised her that he would find me. And she said, well, don't tell your siblings until you do. So when I contacted him, he knew exactly who I was. And I saw that he saw that message at 5 a.m. in the morning. Just after 5 p.m. that afternoon, I was on the phone speaking to him.
Yeah.
And we spoke for an hour and a half. And then he gave me my mother's phone number, and she was waiting for my phone call. And I only remember her first words. I don't remember the rest of the conversation. Her first words were, I was forced.
Oh, gosh.
I never wanted to give you up. So, and next thing, that was on a Friday night. I think on the weekends I was talking to other siblings who rang me, and it was a shock for them too, because while I was talking to my mother, my oldest brother was ringing up my siblings saying, guess what? We've got another sibling. And one of my sisters was telling me that she wasn't home when he made that call, and he told her husband she has to call me back tonight. This is left field. It's about family, and she must call me tonight. It's important. So when she got on the phone, she's to my brother, her husband and her son are in the background saying, stirring her up and going, "Oh, you got another sibling." And she's saying, "Shut up, will you?" Graham's told me something, and it's important.
Yeah.
She put the phone down and turned and went, "I've got another sibling." And so it was quite a shock for them, and it opened up a lot of wounds for them as well.
Yeah.
But
they're on the flip side of that secret, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And we have a reasonably close relationship. My oldest brother, unfortunately, he died 3.5 years after I met him, and we got pretty close. But
thank God you got to meet him.
Yeah, and my mum died in October, so
I'm so sorry, Peter.
6 months ago. So, but I got to spend the last 2 weeks. I spent a number of times where I went to Queensland quite a bit, and I stayed with her quite a bit, and I was with her every day over the last 2 weeks of her life, and I needed to be there, and she needed me to be there.
Yeah.
So I feel I fulfilled that, and there's nothing more I can do. I'm sure there's questions I want answered that I never actually asked her, but they're in the minority. I got most of the answers I asked for.
Yeah. Oh, you got my tears going.
Yeah, don't you go because you get me to go.
Wow. So tell me a little bit more about your reunion with your mother. What did she end up sharing? She said she was forced straight away. What did she end up sharing with you about why you're adopted? Okay,
I think we need to go back to the beginning. I never actually asked them exactly how I was conceived or where I was conceived. I thought I was crossing the line a little bit.
It is a tricky question to ask. I know. Yeah.
But I do know I was conceived in Canberra.
Yeah.
And which brings me to the revelation I had a few days ago, is that I'll be travelling to the 10th anniversary at Parliament House.
So for our listeners, this episode is being recorded in March, just before the 10th anniversary of the National Apology, but the episode itself is not coming out until NAIDOC week in July. So that's all right. Let's just give them some context so they're like, what is happening? Carry on.
So I'll be in Canberra for the 10th anniversary, and I haven't been to the old Parliament House. I've never been to the new Parliament House, but I realised just a couple of days ago that I'm going to where my father lived.
Yeah.
Because Parliament House is built on Capitol Hill, but in the 50s and I think the 60s, Capitol Hill was Capitol Hill migrant camp, and that's where my father lived.
Wow.
And my father was a Italian hairdresser to the politicians, including Sir Robert Menzies and the opposition leader, Arthur Caldwell. They were his clients. So I don't know if he did that in the Parliament House as well. I think he did. But he did end up starting a hairdressing business with another migrant from the camp. And they started a business in Bailey's Arcade in the centre of Canberra.
Yeah.
And his partner is still alive. And in 2017, I visited that premises and met his partner. That premises had a business been going since 1956. And it's still going. It's now moved to a new premises, and his sons now run the business, and daughter, I think. And it's known as Franco's of Canberra for anyone familiar with Canberra. It's quite an exclusive hairdressing salon now.
Yeah.
That's and Franco invited me home to meet his wife, and he gave me wine and he made pasta for me, and his wife provided me photos because my father was their best man at their wedding.
Oh, wow.
And my mother asked me, he said, is his wife's name Anne? And I went, yes. And she said, I thought he would marry her. She was a diplomat's daughter. And I asked Anne, was she a diplomat's daughter? And she said, yes, she was. So, but I still ring them up from time to time.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I was conceived in Canberra. And my mother, her husband had already left, some years previous to that, and left her with two children. And she said she knew my father for about 12 months. They were a group of friends who used to go to dances together. So they knew each other well. And I believe my father, having been a men's hairdresser, wanted to become a women's hairdresser and practiced on her. She tells me he wasn't successful, but I know he went back to Italy and went to Milan and studied hairdressing, and he became very, very good and made quite a lot of money out of that field. So she was in Canberra, and her mother wanted to come home to Pilliga, West New South Wales, out near Walgett, Lightning Ridge, that area. And because her father was dying and her mother wanted assistance with that. And every time I asked my mother a question, she always gave me an answer. And she never faltered, never hesitated. And when I realised she was pregnant with me at Pilliga, and I'd known the Pilliga, and I went, oh, so I was nearly born in Pilliga. And she said, no. She said, my mother wouldn't have it. She bundled me in a car with my brother and told him to take me to Sydney to get rid of you. And that, what I know now, we can talk about later, but it was my grandmother's insistence. And I one day I asked her, I said, how far pregnant were you when you arrived at a door? She said 8.5 months.
Oh, wow.
So that would have been a shock. My grandfather didn't know. He was in the back room, and he did find out, of course, because my mother was away for so long. She was in the hospital for 6 weeks. She refused to leave. And so he obviously started to ask questions, and my understanding is that he was horrified, and had he had a say in it, he would never allow that to happen.
He was horrified that you were adopted. Do you mean?
He was horrified that what had happened.
Yeah.
I shouldn't have been adopted. He was furious. My mother said so. That's the story. I ended up down there, and I thought I was with her for 6 weeks, but then again, with speaking to her, she said, "Oh no," she said, "I only saw a glimpse of you when you're born, and on the day that you're to be adopted, they told me to go to the nursery, and I'd find you on the table inside the nursery, and I had to lean through the window, and they told me to dress you and then go for a walk, and when I come back, you'd be gone." And so it was. It's we all, I guess we all have similar stories. And, that's she told me, and I only found out recently on my way to my mother's deathbed. I was talking to a cousin, and she said, your grandmother and her siblings were all a stolen generation. And I didn't know that. And she said, I've got all the paperwork, and they're all got, numbers that all, are all in sequence for all the siblings. The numbers, sounds familiar, like dare I say, like the concentration camps where they gave everyone a number. Well, they were all given a number. That was
they're completely dehumanized. Yeah.
Yep.
And it was a genocide. So yes.
Yep. Yeah. So that explains a lot. This explains my grandmother not wanting me, and
it does explain some things, doesn't it? Like as far as that inherited trauma, and sometimes it comes back in future generations as a repeat. Even though that's probably the last thing they want, that's kind of like what comes through. It's not always, but sometimes, yeah.
Yeah, when I told my grandmother, told everyone she was Spanish, and my mother didn't know she was Aboriginal until her brother came back from New Zealand after 20 years. And I guess with, the influence over there, maybe with being involved with Maori culture, got him thinking. And he came back and he said, "Do you think Mum's Aboriginal?" And she said, when she thought about it, it made sense. Because she spoke in a language sometimes so the kids couldn't understand what she was saying. And she was obviously speaking Aboriginal language. My mother also knew some Aboriginal language that she picked up as a kid, playing with other Aboriginal kids. But
well, it was dangerous to admit that you're Aboriginal, wasn't it? Because look what happened to her, because she was.
Yeah. And my mother said to her when she told her that, because my grandmother was very proud, apparently, that all her kids had blue eyes. And when my mother told her that my father was Italian, she just assumed I would have brown eyes.
Yeah.
So that was another reason to get rid of me. Of course, I don't have brown eyes, I have blue eyes. And I'm not sure about my father's eyes. I think they're brown, but a lot of my Italian relatives all have blue eyes. And so it wasn't a prerequisite. That's what I was going to get.
Yeah.
But I guess in that regard, when there's that link back to the stolen generation, the intergenerational trauma.
I mean, you had you had so many years of a lie, and then once you open Pandora's box, it's like stuff came flying out to hit you. Like there was just so much that happened so quickly afterwards. I wonder how have you been able to connect with your Aboriginal culture since this discovery?
Okay, so the number one priorities at start were I have to find my mum.
Yeah.
And nothing was going to stop me from finding my mum. So it took me 6 weeks, and look, I know I shouldn't, but I do feel a little bit guilty because of so many adoptees that have found that have been searching for 40 years and haven't found their answers. And, I feel very empathetic for them. And, but, I think the stars lined up for me, to be able to find those things out. And so that was, my first thing. And then the next one was, the Italian side, because I'm not religious, but I'm not Catholic. I don't know anything much about the Catholic religion, but I knew that my relations being Italian would be very Catholic, and I didn't know how they would take me. And my sister I was in contact with, she withdrew. She told me she would, just want to withdraw and go back into a shell. And we used to have this, we still do, I think, have this ESP thing going where when I was communicating with her, I wouldn't hear from her for weeks and weeks and weeks, and I was frustrated, never going to hear from this woman again, And then out of the blue, I would get a novel, and I would quickly write a novel back, and then wait for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks for a reply, and just when I'd given up hope, almost, I'd get contact from her. Anyway, I knew that I had 2 more siblings there.
Yeah.
And I knew one lived in Melbourne and one lived in London. And I'm starting to worry. Look, I've got 2 siblings. I don't even know their names. Am I ever going to know their names? I should know their names. And I'm starting to panic again. And because I haven't heard from her for months. And out of the blue, just as I'm thinking about this, I get a text message. A text message says, I think you should contact your siblings. You have every right. I'll send you their details. And then nothing. And I rang her up and she answered, and she said, "Oh, I've had a change of heart. I'm worried about causing drama." And I said, "Just give me their names. I'll find them." And I did.
Yeah.
And I've met both of them. I went to Melbourne and I met my brother, and when I saw him walk down the stairs, I'm about 5'6". I don't know what he is. He's over 6 foot. And I looked up at him and went, "Twins." But
Wow.
and my sister flew in from Melbourne one time. Just actually, I was, yeah. But before all that happened, before I contacted him, I'm going to say, before I contact, this is important, I made a conscious decision not to contact him yet, because I thought my chances would improve if I can make contact with the family, and if by some chance they accept me, then I think I would have greater chance that my siblings would meet with me.
Mm-hmm.
So I knew I had some cousins in Sydney. I'd found them in the white pages. And I decided this day I was going to meet up with them. I was in Sydney and I thought, oh, they're tradesmen. I'll wait until after 4 o'clock. Anyway, I found myself in the suburb of Sydney where they were, or where one of the addresses were, and I thought, oh, I'm here now. We'll just drive past the house. As I drive past, there's a white tradesman's van in the driveway. I went, oh, not at work. So I pulled up around the corner and I rang up and they answered and I went, "Hey, Tony, how you going, mate?" And he went, "I'm going good, mate. How are you?" I said, "I'm going great." I said, I'm your cousin you don't know." He went, "What?" I said, "I'm your cousin you don't know and I think we should meet." He said, "Where are you?" I went, "I'm in Bexley." He went, "I'm in Bexley." I went, "Yeah, I know." And he said, "What, but how, what?" And I went, "Mate, long story." I said, "Do you want to meet at your place or you want to meet at Bexley McDonald's?" He said, "Well, where are you?" I said, "I'm around the corner from your place. I'm 2 minutes from Bexley McDonald's." He said, "I'll meet you at Macca's in 5. So I went to Macca's and waited, and he came in and I started to tell him the story and he went, wow, I think we better sit down." And he started to tell me that, he said, "My father was very close to your father." And it turns out Tony was my second cousin. His father's my first cousin. And my father had brought him to Canberra when he was 16. And he lived in the migrant camp with my father. And my father helped get him his first start as basically a handyman, and which led to his lifelong career as a painter and decorator. And anyway, that house wasn't Tony's house; it was his parents' house. And he said, "Do you want to come around and meet Mum and Dad?"
Oh, stop it.
And I went, "There might be a bit of a shock for him." And he went, well, yeah, but they'll get over it. So he said, "Follow me around." So I've got my own tradesman van. I followed Tony around in his, and he drove up the drive and I followed him up the drive. I got out and I walked up the drive into the courtyard, and his father walked out of the garage in the courtyard, and his mother walked out of the house into the courtyard.
Yep.
And I went over and shook his father's hand. I went, "Buongiorno." And I shook his mum's hand. I went, "Buongiorno." And then they started speaking to me in Italian.
No.
And Tony goes, no, he doesn't understand. So then he starts explaining in Italian who I am. And they're looking at him and they're looking at me, and I'm nodding my head. Yeah, it's true. It's all true.
Yeah.
And anyway, his mum I love his mum. She's a gorgeous woman. She said, you'll come on inside the house. You come on inside. I come inside and they've got this big table, and she said, oh, you sit there, you sit there. And she said, you like a coffee? You like me make a coffee? I went, yeah, okay, I'll have a coffee. Halfway through the coffee, she goes, no. You want a beer? I get you a beer.
My husband's grandparents came over from Italy. They were migrants, and nobody does hospitality like the Italians. So I've got to tell you, and family is very important. Yeah. Carry on. Sorry.
No, that's all good. And so I look, just for everyone listening, I think this is important, that when you get rejection, that sometimes things can change.
Mm-hmm.
And my sister had been in Italy and told I have 2 surviving aunts,
mm-hmm.
and one in Italy and one in Sydney. And when she spoke to the aunt in Italy about it, she didn't want to know about it. That's when I decided to go and meet Franco in Canberra, because I needed to meet someone who knew my dad, you know.
Yeah.
And so anyway, when I went at this meeting, basically they said, you have an aunt close by. And I went, yeah. They said, would you like to go and meet her? I said, yeah, I'm expecting that I'm going to get rejection because 2 sisters would talk. And anyway, Tony's mum decides, she said, no, I'll ring. She said, we speak every day. And then she rings up, they're laughing and joking, Italian, and all of a sudden, nothing. Silent. I went, I know what's going on here. And no, she didn't want to meet me. But anyway, Tony was going, she'll come round, and Tony's dad's going, well, we'll just go around there. What's she going to do? Kick us out? You know? Anyway, no, it's all good. It's all good. Yeah. Anyway, a week later, I rang back and said, just seeing how things went with dust settled. You know, I'd been away from business for a week. So, and he said, "It's Fabio ring." I went, "Who's Fabio?" And I have a brother, Fabio. He said, it's your cousin, your auntie's son. He's all excited. He wants to meet you, wants to take you out for dinner.
Oh.
So he said, I thought he would have rang you. Here's his number. You ring him. So I rang him. We got on like a house on fire, and eventually arranged for me to go to a luncheon at his place on Easter Monday. And he said, you're in touch with your sister? And I went, yes. He said, will you ask her? He said, we haven't seen her for such a long time. Yeah. Anyway, I rang her, and she, I don't know, it didn't sound positive. I didn't think she was going to come. About 3 days before, she messaged me, are you still going? I went, yes. You sure it's okay for me to go? This is your family. Yeah. Baby has asked you specifically. Oh, should I bring my husband? Yeah. And anyway, I didn't hear any more, but I arrived there, and my sister and her husband were there, and the auntie was there. And I brought my daughter and my granddaughter, and but we had a wonderful 7.5 hours of luncheon, and got on very well with everyone. Got on very well with the auntie, and thanked her for being there. And I mean, she was very nice to my granddaughter, and anyway, I decided I was coming to Italy. I needed to go to Italy to visit my father's grave. And I'd asked a cousin, I'll step back a minute. The following day after this luncheon, I got a call from a woman, and her first words were, I'm going to shock you. And I said, no, you're not. You're not going to shock me. And she said, I'm your cousin. I was your father's apprentice. I owe everything I have in my life to your father. So she said, I didn't know the luncheon was on. we'll have another lunch in my place next week. So it was another 7.5 hours. And a whole heap other cousins.
Yep.
And anyway, we keep in contact. And I was going to Italy, and I said, look, I'm a bit worried. It's in Calabria down south, and I know the further south you get, the less English is spoken. And I'm going in this little village, and I don't speak the language, and no one knows who I am. And she said, no. She said, you knock on the first door you come to. They'll know who you are. She said, in fact, if you see some kids playing the street, go up to them. They'll know who you are.
Wow.
And she was right. I arrived in this village. I did get a guided tour, and I'll explain it a bit later. But I arrived in this village, and I just felt at peace. I understood immediately why my father had gone back there to die. My father knew he was dying. He had cancer. He had about 5 years, and he went back there to be with family. And I got it. They were right. Everyone in that village knows everyone. And I was telling this story to someone else, and another Aboriginal man, and it occurred to me, this was mob. This was his mob, and he was going home to be with his mob. And that was quite profound, that realization that that's what this was. But just before I headed there, I got a phone call or a message from another woman who wanted contact, and she was the daughter-in-law of the aunt in Italy.
Yes. And
she said, you're going back to that village? I went, yes. She said, you're going to see your aunt when you get there, aren't you? And I'm thinking, does she want to see me? She said she'd be most upset to know that you went to that village and didn't go and see her.
Oh, wow.
And well, as it turns out, the day I turned up, she was at the luncheon. But we got on fabulously. She got very frustrated with the fact I couldn't speak English. I think she had wanted to tell me so much stuff. And
Italian,
Yep. And but she kept saying to me, "Nuovo Nepalti," which means new nephew.
No.
And so when we went back to that village a number of times over a week period, and every time I went there, she wasn't at lunch, and I would make sure I went to her house and visit her. But so things can change. Perceptions can change, and sometimes you can have a great relationship with people, and
Yeah, that's it. And sometimes we're so focused on just the, mother-father relationship. Sometimes there's some to be had in the extended family. And like you said, no doesn't always remain a no. And sometimes it's just a matter of adjusting our expectations. And also I have to say, Peter, like from the moment we first spoke, which wasn't that long ago, there's a shining light in you. There's a warmth that comes out. And I can imagine that when people, even if it's just a phone call or meeting you face to face for the first time, you draw people in. So I think you would be very difficult to meet and not welcome, because that is part of you, and it's probably part of that genetic, Italian and Aboriginal culture that comes through you, I think.
Yeah, well, I was talking to another cousin from Melbourne, and his father was my father's older brother, and basically like a mentor. And he said to me, your father was a socialite. He said he wasn't just a hairdresser, he was a socialite. And I can't divulge my sister in London, but I can say she's a socialite.
Yeah.
And it doesn't come as any surprise. But yeah, it's I've got a little funny story when I went and saw that aunt one day, because they always say, why are you staying in a bed and breakfast? Why are you not stay here?
Yeah.
And we called in there one day, and we were on our way to dinner at another cousin's place in another village, and I wanted to go back to the bed and breakfast and freshen up. And she was, no, you should freshen up here, you know. And, I have another nephew and he come here and stays and all this. And I'm there with there was a young girl there, another, a second cousin of mine, I guess. And she could speak a little bit of English and she was translating for me. And my sense of humor, I said, ask her if I can borrow a toothbrush. and she cracked up and she went, I can't ask her that.
Hers would be fine. I'll wash it.
But I think they got my sense of humor, and lots of stories got back to Australia before I did, and I went and visited my father's grave. They took me and showed me his grave, and I came back alone twice, and I wrote a poem, 8 pages of poem. It's out there, internet somewhere. Adoption is such a lie, and it's basically my story. I had to get it out. I couldn't put 2 rhyming sentences together at school, but I was coming home one day and I went, I've got to get this out, and I've got to put in a poem, and it's got to be rhyming, and I've got to do it tonight. And I did. I wrote it in one session, and anyway, I took that poem with me, and I went back to his grave. But before I went back, I went to the florist and got flowers, because my father's, they're above ground in a what do they call them? Above ground tomb thing.
Oh yeah, mausoleum or something.
Mausoleum, that's what I was thinking. Yep. Yeah. And his mother and father are above him, and his sister's beside him. So there's 4 of them. And I brought flowers, and I also, at the bed and breakfast where I was staying, he was another distant cousin, and he grew up in Canada, and he was a property developer or something. He came back to the village and built this beautiful big house as a bed and breakfast. And so I asked him, I don't know, where do you buy these candles and things? Because there was a little chapel there, And he told me, he came from the supermarket. So I somehow got the checkout girl to understand what I wanted, and I got some matches and candles. And anyway, I went back and I sat in front of the graves, and I read my poem to him, and because I got quite emotional through it. And I just finished it, and these 2 Italian women walked around the corner. They must have heard me, and with investigating what they were hearing was unusual. And I pointed to the grave and I went, mio padre, my father. And they looked at the name and they told me where he came from, because this, this cemetery is central. It's in between villages. And they went, oh yeah, there's difference. They knew everyone. Everyone knows everyone around that area, knows their names and stuff, And it's a little bit like the Aboriginal community too. Everything goes on surname, Yeah. As soon as you know, what's your mob? As soon as you mention your surname, oh yeah, okay, yeah, and they'll know someone in that surname, But yeah, absolutely loved Italy. It's a amazing place.
Yeah, we hope to go there one day and visit the relatives, I guess.
Right.
I know my father-in-law went back.
Take as long a time as you can possibly do it.
Yeah.
Because I think you can go back there 100 times and still not see everything. We were there for 6 weeks. We drove around from top to bottom to Sicily and back up the other side to Venice, and and we were supposed to go on COVID, but luckily I didn't buy the tickets. I was a bit concerned about what this COVID thing might evolve into. But it's still very much the plans to go back. But back to the Aboriginal side.
Well, I was just going to say too, I love that you, so you might be a latecomer to knowing that you're adoption, but in a space of a few years, you managed to do something that took me kind of 51 years to do, which is like really connect in that deep way with. We've heard about the Italian culture and your father and visiting that grave, and that's something I only just did last year in Sydney, and it was incredibly life-changing for me having done that. So you really pulled that one out well, and I can see that it really has connected you.
Yeah, well, that was 2018, but yeah.
Yeah, it's not that long ago.
Yeah, and I those candles, I did go to the chapel, and I didn't know what I was doing, but I thought that that's something my father would want me to do.
It's a ceremony that you did, and it meant something to you, and it connected you, and that's important.
Yeah. And I did that twice. So I went back again, looking at myself. I've got to, I've only got a limited time here. I promised him I would come back.
Yeah.
And I promised him I'll come back again. So the Italian side, the Aboriginal side, I've now had, time. I've reunited with my mother and my siblings and on my father's side, and so now I have time to sit back and and I have done some activism with Aboriginal group in Sydney, the Grandmothers Against Removals. I got to know them quite well, and I was asked to speak at the 12th anniversary of the Stolen Generation rally, and stood out the front of New South Wales Parliament House and pointed back towards and said, "The house of lies and deception behind me," and anyway, so I've had a bit of involvement, and involvement with some of the local community that are, my son's best mate was Aboriginal, and I got to know his family a little bit, and my son-in-law is an Aboriginal liaison officer at the local high schools, and he asked me, he said, "Do you want to get your confirmation?" And I went, "Well, yeah." And he said, "I'll give you the number of an elder." He said, "Go and ring him up." He said, "Go and have a coffee with him and tell him your story." And so I did that, and he gave me an application form for a confirmation, and told me, to get all this stuff together and then go to the elders meeting. So I did that. I went to the elders meeting, and they had all my information. I stood up and I told them my story. And anyway, they asked me to wait outside while they made a decision, and they called me back in, and they said, "Well, you've got your confirmation, but we would also like to ask you to apply to be an elder."
Wow.
And I was flabbergasted. I wasn't expecting that at all. And they said, "We want you to fill the form out now." And they said, "You are over 50. I went, "Yeah." So I joined the elders group.
I love this story. Yeah, keep going.
And 6 months down the track in December, because I find myself going to all these NAIDOC school days and all that sort of stuff, and other flag raising events and different things. And anyway, come December, they do have the AGM, and the secretary resigned, and they nominated me from the floor. And I went, "No," I said, "I'm the worst minutes taker you're ever going to find." And they went, "But will you do it?" How do I say no? I can't. Of course I'll do it. So I now find myself I'm the secretary, and we had a couple of people come in for confirmations on that day, and they said, "Oh, before you go, as secretary, you've got to countersign the confirmations." And now here I am, signing confirmations. It's just I could never have seen any of that happening. It's just, you go back 6 years, and if you'd told me 6 years ago all this stuff, I would never have believed that.
That embrace from the community, though, even like for me, it's being embraced into the adoption community through my work with Jigsaw, becoming part of something is just so important. I mean, because you may get to reunite with your family, and you may get to, connect with your culture that way. But also we are a community, and you're just like your Aboriginal community is one that you can, being embraced in that way is really important.
Yeah. It's been hard to accept, like, the last NAIDOC ball I went to, and they said, "Oh, elders get up and get your photos taken." And I was there with someone else who was also stolen generation, and we know how it's hard to accept that you'd be accepted. And we didn't stand up. I sort of regret not standing up, but at the same time, we weren't ready. We weren't in that space, and I can't speak for them now, but I think it might be different. But I am ready now to stand up. But I needed to go through that process, and I couldn't just accept it from day one. I just think that was a bit brash of me to do that. I remember one of the elders said to me, he said, "Did you get up and get your photo?" I went, "No." I said, "I don't feel, no one knows me." And he said, "They wouldn't care." And I have a lot of respect for him, and I guess you're right, but
maybe that's part of the adoption thing that lingers with us, not feeling like, for years I didn't feel like I could own my ancestors or own pieces of their stuff, or their photos, or that they belonged to me. And that trip to Sydney that I had changed all of that for me, where I felt like I own them as much as they own me, and that was as much mine as it was anyone else's.
Well, I think my acceptance, because I look at, okay, my grandmother was stolen generation, and her father got the kids back. He was white, and he got the kids back out of the missions. I'm not sure how he did that, but he managed to get them out. But I think he was much a part of the problem as well. He was I believe he was quite a hard guy, but he was quite a complex person, I think, from what I read.
Yeah.
And so he had influence on that as well, as declare you Aboriginal and whatnot. And I think that it's disrespect to my great grandmother that I didn't accept it, and I think it's just my role to identify. I think it would be disrespectful to her if I didn't. And I've had some siblings who are now exploring it, and a nephew, who's identifies, and his partner's Aboriginal, so and it's a journey for us. I think he reaches out to me, for information. So I'm helping him on his journey as a family history and where we all fit in and whatnot. And it's all part of the journey. It's I gotta say it's the highs I think of this, and I grew up in a typical Anglo-Saxon, dare I say, bigoted, racist family. Not they would never have said they were racist, but at the end of the day, those things are ingrained, and they're ingrained into me too. And and I think maybe sometimes that's part of the thing too. Is am I a hypocrite? No. Anyone can accept that they're wrong. Yeah. And change their thinking, and
we're all on a journey in this life, aren't we, Peter? Of learning, of education, of knowing better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's no one's got the answers at any, all the answers at any one time, and dealing with kids, because there's lots of foster kids and my own kids, and you can look back at them now and you go, they all know everything.
Yeah.
And you can't be too critical, because we all knew everything too.
Yes, we did. My kids might say, I still know everything, but I know that I don't know everything, so maybe I do.
That's it. What we know is we know we don't know everything, and that makes us different. Exactly. this is unfolding the same, this minefield of, walking through the adoption and mothers are lost community, with differing views and experiences and traumas, and
Mm-hmm.
it's a difficult path to navigate at times, and language is everything, and what's okay for one is not okay for another, and it's a test to this point diplomacy.
Yes, it does. I agree.
Yeah.
I guess this is my final question for you then, Peter, is what does the future hold for you?
The future for me, I guess, I'm still striving to change the narrative, to stop the invalidation, and that invalidations, whether that be in community expectations or perceptions or media, or invalidation through legislation, fighting for our human rights, which I think we have a right to, and we have a right to fight for, and I think that's, I know this journey will continue on long after, this fight will continue long after I'm gone, but I really feel we're making traction. We're getting inroads. We're talking to more and more journalists, and I think we're getting heard. Not as quick as we want,
Mm-hmm.
and we're not getting the concrete action that we want. I don't want to hear sorry. I want to hear we're outraged that this happened.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we should be all outraged that it happened. And I think the legislators should be outraged that it happened, and should be outraged it's in their legislation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we're slowly getting a voice. And obviously I get critics to say, well, you don't speak for all adoptees. And I think, well, no, I don't. But I do speak for the ones who can't speak for themselves. And I know that's many. Someone's got to, be out there. I never wanted to be the front person or the spokesperson. I don't crave the media attention, but if I don't do it, who else is going to do it? I'm happy for someone else to step up. I want more people to step up. We need variety. We need a multitude of voices stepping up.
Mm-hmm.
We need support, and I think we need more people to step up and support the rest of us.
Yeah.
So that's my future moving forward. I think, encouraging people.
Peter, that's a great note to end on, and I thank you so very much for sharing your story with us. I don't know how long we've gone for. I might have to split it in two, and I will, rather than cut anything out, because I just enjoyed speaking with you so much and hearing your story. And we'll be putting relevant links up, including to Adoptee Rights Australia website, and I hope you'll send me a link for your poem, so that we can put that up for people to have a look at as well. But again, thank you so much. I know listening to your episode is going to help a lot of people. There's a lot of people who are going to be able to identify it or just learn from hearing it. So thank you.
No, thank you so much. I've very much enjoyed being here.
Meanwhile, do you have a story that you'd like to share with us? If you'd like to be interviewed for the podcast, jump onto the main podcast page of the Jigsaw Queensland website and complete the prospective guest form that you'll find there. And note that Adopt Perspective can be listened to by people all over the world. Bye for now. Thanks for listening to the Adopt Perspective podcast. If you'd like to find out more, go to the podcast page on www.jigsawqueensland.com. and you'll find a wealth of information and resources on the website. If you reside in Queensland, you can reach Jigsaw Queensland's Forced Adoption Support Service on toll-free 1800 2103 or you can call Jigsaw on 07 33 58 6666. If you live in another state of Australia, you can still call the Forced Adoption Support Service number, and your call will be answered by the Forced Adoption Support Service in the state that you are calling from. In every other state, Relationships Australia operates this service. A big thank you to Matt Sparrow for composing and recording our original theme music. Until next time, I'm Jo Sparrow saying farewell from Adopt Perspective, a podcast for anyone affected by adoption.